Welcome to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri, a Beverly Hills-based psychologist, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Modern Intimacy. Thanks for joining me here where I talk about sex, relationships, mental health, and dive into your questions with practical answers and real solutions. Each week, I share insights aimed at helping you build an authentic and healthy relationship with yourself, with others, and with your sexuality. It's time to get naked, emotionally, mentally, and on your own time, physically. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be back on another episode of Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Today, I've got Tawny Lara with me, who is known as the Sober Sexpert. That is such a fun name. Tawny writes and speaks about alcohol-free sex and dating. Her work's been featured in Playboy, Men's Health, The Huffington Post, and 2 essay collections, Sex and the Single Woman and The Addiction Diaries. She's the co-host of the Signal award-winning podcast Recovery Rocks and the story developer for the Webby award-winning podcast Fucking Sober. So Dry Humping is her first book. That is the best name I've heard for a book in a long time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me. This is so great. IRL.
It's amazing.
Yes.
Thank you for making it happen.
Of course, we've been Instagram friends for a while and we're finally meeting and in is it 3D?
Is this 3D?
I don't know.
3D, 4D? Maybe it should be 5D.
Yeah.
But that's a different episode.
It is. That's the next episode.
Yeah. So Dry Humping. Ooh, for those of you on YouTube watching, here's the book. It's so fun. How did you come up with the idea for this? What prompted it?
Yeah. So when I quit drinking almost 8 years ago, the thought of dating, let alone having sex without alcohol, just truly scared the hell out of me.
Why?
What I now know is that I was relying on liquid courage to feel more confident in the bedroom, to feel more confident on dates. I was really numbing myself. I was not in a good place. I didn't know how to communicate, set boundaries. I didn't even know what boundaries were. I know I was self-medicating anxiety and depression and PTSD and numbing out was a lot easier. But for the focus of the book, it really is sex, dating, and relationships. And I examine the role that alcohol, but especially liquid courage, plays in our love lives. And it's a sex and dating book, but it's also it's really interpersonal relationships. How to, like I said, communicate, advocate for yourself, set boundaries, and not rely on alcohol for that confidence.
Yeah. And I love that. And when I was looking through your book, I thought there's so many great topics in here that people who are newly sober, thinking about getting sober, or have no plans to get sober can really take in and internalize, because you talk about this really, what you just said, the super important role that alcohol plays for a lot of people in giving them confidence and skipping over the hard parts of negotiating intimacy. And that is something that I think most people can relate to.
That's the real thing. It's I think in the book I describe what you just said as outsourcing your confidence to alcohol. And I want to be very clear. I'm not anti-alcohol at all. I'm anti-big alcohol and I'm anti, binge drinking to numb your feelings. But this book is really a conversation on relying on a substance to power through something. And it gives the reader tangible tips on how to date without alcohol, how to have a conversation, how to communicate. There's a whole chapter on alcohol-free date ideas. Spoiler alert, every date is alcohol-free. We just add it,
That is so true. So true. We make it such a focal point in our society, and especially for dating. It's you suss out what the other person is getting as a drink as if that means something about their personality. I mean, it becomes a currency to evaluate personality for a lot of people.
Totally. And it's becoming reliant on it is it's this currency of that person's hot over there. I'm going to take a shot before I go talk to them.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's you're really not doing the work to develop real confidence. You're really outsourcing that. And I think, one of the biggest questions that I get in my line of work is how can I be more confident on a date in the bedroom without alcohol? And I remind people if you're sober or sober curious, that's one of the most confident, badass things
Totally.
you could do.
Yeah.
And that's the confidence that you take into the bedroom. That's the confidence that you take, onto a date or when you're advocating for a boundary, because you evaluate your relationship with alcohol because you're taking a stand for your mental health. I'm not saying getting sober. I'm saying a lot of people are just reevaluating how they're drinking. That's a pretty badass thing to do.
It is. It is. Alcohol is just in the fabric of maturation for a lot of people. It's a rite of passage. And for a lot of folks in high school, college, and in their early life, their early 20s, it's just something that is woven into everything that you do. And it takes such a priority stance in the lives of so many folks. So much so that I work with people who will say, I don't even remember my 20s. They're a blur to me. And you know what? I have years like that too, where I look back and I'm like, oh, I was pretty drunk that whole year. That was just my year.
Yeah. It's a thing. And it's, I quit drinking right before my 30th birthday. And I had this, very cinematic, dramatic moment where I'm looking in the mirror and I'm hungover and yesterday's mascara is flaked under my eyes. And I'm like, this isn't cute anymore.
Aww.
Maybe it never was cute.
Yeah.
And I was binge drinking until I blacked out on a regular basis. We're not talking about having a glass of wine at dinner.
Yeah.
I was abusing alcohol to hide from my shit. Then you figure out your shit.
Well, that's a really scary thing to do, right? I mean, when a lot of people are in that space of questioning, what am I doing right now with these substances or with this behavior that I'm really compulsive in, whatever it might be, stepping away from that is scary as fuck. Because that's become the biggest coping mechanism and the most reliable. For a lot of people, alcohol or another drug or another compulsive behavior becomes their friend. They develop a relationship with that part of themselves that's numbing out. And because it feels like the safest way to be, because they don't know other ways to be.
And
just
it's easy.
It is easy.
It's easy
It's
to
fast.
it's real quick. You take a shot of tequila, you feel better real quick.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize what you just said is so powerful. People don't realize there's a lot behind that onion. Once you start peeling it, people think, if my husband could just get sober, everything would get better. Or, if I could just drink less, everything will get better. But when you stop drinking, you realize, hopefully you do the work to realize why you were so reliant on that liquid in the first place. And that is really tough, arduous, emotionally, physically exhausting work. I really felt like I met myself for the first time, since I was a kid. I was self-medicating for almost 15 years. And then I quit drinking, and I'm still meeting myself, almost 8 years later.
Wow. That's a beautiful process. I love even thinking about just the reality and the realization of how many layers and dimensions you have, that you get to keep meeting these new parts of yourself.
It's also exhausting.
Yeah.
I'm ready for I was going to say I'm ready for the journey to end, but that sounds really bleak. But it's there is this almost piece of knowing I'm really never going to completely figure myself out. And I say that because I wish I heard someone else say that when I was having dark times of I saw people, it's man, they have their shit together. No, we're all really struggling. We're taking it we say one day at a time for a reason, right?
Yeah.
I still never say that I will never drink again because it's one day at a time.
Yep.
I'm not going to drink today, probably not going to drink tomorrow. That's all I know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's necessary, right? When we start looking too far in the future, then it starts feeling really heavy and there's a lot of pressure to make a decision and know what you're going to do. I hear from so many of the people that I work with, when they're in early recovery, they're like, what the fuck do I do with myself? What do I do?
Yeah.
Please, can someone give me some guidance? Because I don't know what to do right now, let alone in a week or 3 weeks or 6 months. And when you start looking at sort of that compounding runway of time, it's I should have answers and I don't.
Yeah. And that's the really tricky part is we drink because right now sucks.
Right.
But if you drink, it's a little more numb or a lot more numb, depending on how much you're drinking. So when you're stuck with yourself and reality and your interpersonal relationships, that it hits you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
What was the most difficult part about that for you? Just not having the alcohol anymore, really meeting yourself, learning about yourself, and being faced with just sort of all this new, I guess, data about who you are not, and like the fact that you're learning that in that moment.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that my father's sober. So early sobriety, I called him, and he's a musician, so we do talk a lot about music. And I was like, it feels like everything has turned to 11. Like quoting Spinal Tap, and I was just like, I quit drinking, and when I was drinking, my senses were numb. Which is like, and we can get into how that impacts pleasure, of course. But I was not seeing, like, my vision got better, my hearing got better, my senses became better because I was not numbing them. And it, like, once you figure out the science behind what alcohol is actually doing to your body, it makes perfect sense.
Sure. But
when you're newly sober, it can almost be overstimulating. Because you're not self-medicating anymore. I got into therapy. I got on antidepressants, and I'm properly medicated now. But it's a journey, it's a journey to find the right therapist. It's a journey to find the right mix of medications and your self-care practice. It really, like, we say one day at a time, because it's like, I have this metaphorical toolbox of all the stuff I have to do just to maintain, like, a baseline level of sanity.
Mm-hmm. So when you were in that process, like, how long did it take for you to feel like you kind of like would wake up and feel okay?
I think, like, once I felt comfortable with my therapist, I think that's when it started. I found a peer support group that worked for me. Writing was a really big part of just letting myself pour all these feelings out onto the page. Was super helpful. But I would say it was about a year or two before I really started to like myself, is like, to be completely honest, of, there's a lot of forgiving yourself. There's a lot of family forgiveness that you have to go through. And it's figuring out who your real friends are versus your drinking buddies. It's a lot.
Yeah. It's a lot of transformation.
It is. And I don't think people realize that. They think sobriety, or they think recovery is just not drinking. And not drinking is actually the smallest part of a recovery program.
Yeah. If you're working a really strong one.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and I'd say in the book, like, AA is not part of my story. Actually, I met my husband in an AA meeting, but I've only been to a handful of them. So I did kind of a patchwork recovery program that works for me.
Good. So were you in a relationship when you got sober? Were you single?
I was very single.
Okay.
I was new to New York.
Okay.
So I moved to New York summer of 2015. I got sober November of 2015.
Okay.
So I only know New York sober. I didn't drink very much there. I think I needed to get out of my hometown and get away from my family and find my identity. So it's like, for me, sobriety, finding my voice as a writer, and living in New York, they all go hand in hand to me becoming who I am today.
Yeah. Wow, that's really remarkable. What a brave and scary thing to do, to move to a new city, especially one as stimulating as New York, and then suddenly take away your biggest coping mechanism.
I know, but I don't know that I would have quit drinking if I stayed back home. Like, I grew up in Texas, and I was a bartender. I was living like this stereotypical party girl bartender life, and I think I knew on some level that I needed to get out. Yeah. Writing was my reason. I wanted to be a writer in New York City. I had no clue that I was going to get sober 4 months later. But, life, man.
I mean, life does that, right? It throws all kinds of fun surprises. So when did you start dating after you got sober? Like, let's kind of bridge into what it means to be in that space.
Yeah. I waited probably 6 months before I started dating. A lot of recovery programs will tell you to wait at least a year. That is an arbitrary time period. Wait until you're ready. The first chapter of my book is called Dating Yourself. That's really what I call that chapter of my life, is those first 6 months I was, working out. I ran a half marathon. That's like,
wow.
That was a very like newly sober thing to do because there's all this energy I had to get out. So first and last half marathon, let's just say. But I was really focusing on myself. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I was in therapy. I was unpacking my shit. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have time or even the desire to date because, like I said, it scared the thought of it scared the hell out of me. Mm-hmm. And then I started meeting people and slowly started to date. And I found myself advocating for myself in ways that I never did before. And I know it's because I quit drinking. And for example, like, telling someone the first person I went on dates with, like, I'm newly sober, so I need to go slow here. And he was like, fine, sure. Like, how can I support you?
Wow.
And I would have never asked to go slow or advocated for myself like that before. And then when it came time for us getting intimate, I was like, this is my first time having sex or even doing anything intimate without alcohol. And I'm nervous. I might need to take some breaks. Mm-hmm. Again, I would have never done that before. And he was so receptive. I'm very, very appreciative of that. And that's not who I married, but he was, a part of the chapter. And I really I'm so grateful that I took that time to myself, to what I call it dating myself. So when you do start to bring other people into your life, you know who you are. Yeah. You know what your boundaries are and so you can know how to advocate for them. And I think that's so important.
It really is. I mean, it changes the landscape of dating when you really understand your own limits, your own needs, your own boundaries, and you feel empowered to advocate for them. Like you said, it's a really different kind of you get a different kind of reaction when you're really firm in that. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard to be firm in those boundaries and your needs and what you're going to bring to a relationship until you have the time to really know yourself and feel like you can rely on your own I want to use the word integrity, but that's not what I mean.
I was thinking intuition?
No, I mean just kind of your own sustainability on your path, right?
I like that.
It's easy to waver if you don't feel like you deserve to have the limits and boundaries and needs that you do have.
Well, no, that reminds me of like, people pleasing was a big part of my drinking behavior and a big part of like who I was in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. And my relationship with sex has changed completely.
So your first time having sex, what was different for you sober? What did you experience that was new or just like really curious?
I mean, it was really interesting to have a genuine connection with someone first. Like I realized I didn't really even date when I was drinking. I just I bartended and I hooked up. Oh. And then sometimes we would live together and then sometimes it would be a one night stand, but I would never really dated very much. So I had to learn how to do that. And then once I figured out how to do that, I felt a little bit more comfortable. Like, I think that helped me feel more comfortable in bed. Mm-hmm. But like I said, I was overstimulated, which is why I told this person, like, I might need to take a break. I might need to go slow. Mm-hmm. I was overstimulated. We took pause. We would pause. We would have a cup of tea. We would, but we still had, it was fun.
Yeah.
I stopped trying to make sex what I thought it should be. And I let it just be like, this is where I am sexually today.
Yeah. You stopped performing.
I literally stopped performing.
Beautiful.
And it was such a filter because anyone who couldn't meet me there was like, not worth my time, and I never respected myself enough to have a standard like that.
Wow. So in terms of pleasure, did you notice any increases, decreases, or was your capacity for pleasure the same? So you mentioned that your senses really came back online when you got sober. So I'm curious what that did
They did.
to your pleasure capacity.
Yeah, I mean, like alcohol, literally, it's a central nervous system depressant. So, when you're drinking alcohol to quell anxiety, quell depression, quell PTSD, it's not just calming down your brain. You really are reducing your pleasure centers and just your senses. So that's why I was saying it was turned to 11. It's interesting. The first time that I had sober sex, I realized this pattern that I had of faking orgasms. I did that for years and years. And then with him for the first time, I was like, this is usually the time when I would fake an orgasm, but I don't want to do that. And he was like, great, don't do it. And I never equated the two because I was performing. I thought sex was supposed to be and feel a certain way.
Yeah.
So once I was able to remove that performance, and then I could actually be more present in bed and feeling my body. And I'm still working with a therapist on the mind body connection because 8 years later, it's something that I still struggle with. And I think it's important to talk about, I could write a book about sex and still say that I'm working, I'm working on my sex life,
Yeah. I think a lot of people work on their sex lives, hopefully, because we're dynamic beings. We don't just emerge fully cooked and then we're done, right? We're constantly growing, changing. Our bodies are changing. So the way that
hormones are changing.
everything.
Our interests change. Yeah. There's toys that you might like a year from now that don't interest you today, or positions that you used to like but you don't really do anymore. And just being open to trying new things, and it's huge.
So when you were dating, how long did you date before you met your current partner?
We met when I was 3 years sober.
3 years sober.
Yeah, and he's also, like I said, I met him in an AA meeting. So we each had about 3 years of our own recovery time before we found each other.
Okay, amazing.
Which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it like how have the two of you incorporated recovery into your life, into your marriage?
I will say Nick likes to say that AA was almost like feelings school. Like men are not taught to communicate or feel their feelings. And he learned how to communicate and how to advocate for himself in those rooms, which makes our relationship so much better. I've never been in a relationship with a man who tells me how he's feeling, who listens so actively. And it's almost like, as you know, it's its own language. Recovery and just mental health in general is its own language. So we understand each other on a really, I think on a beautiful level. Wow. And it's not that I really didn't think I'd end up with someone sober. No? I'm shocked. I mean, I knew that I wanted to be with someone who was self-aware, was either in therapy or had done the work. I knew those were really important to me. But it really is we speak our own language and we're able to communicate. I'm feeling, this feels triggering for me. I can't do this right now. And just a language I never had before that he thankfully speaks to.
Wow. That's so beautiful. It makes such a big difference when you're on the same page in that way. And when you're not negotiating, having to be out in a party scene with a partner who's still in that space in their lives and wants to be maybe.
Well, and there's a whole chapter in the book called How to Date Someone Who Drinks.
Yeah.
Because that's another big question that I get is just because you quit drinking, your partner still might drink. You can't make them do a dry month with you. And so it deserves its own chapter because it's such a big, big subject. So I give people sample conversations, ways to really start these conversations with your partner. Hey, I want to do a dry month, or I'd like to not keep alcohol in the house anymore. Or you really have to figure out your relationship with alcohol and how you want to approach sober curiosity or sobriety. And then you can tell your person how to show up for you. And it's a really delicate subject because it often ends a relationship.
It can. Yeah. Which can be a real bummer. But, maybe it's just an opportunity. I don't mean to say just to minimize, but maybe it's an opportunity to kind of think about more alignment, right, with other people. And if you're not aligned, that's okay. It doesn't make anyone a good person or a bad person.
Yeah.
It really just speaks to where people are in their lives in a given moment.
And it's like, it's so easy to say that objectively, but when you're in it, it's devastating. I mean, and there's a chapter about sober breakups because I didn't feel comfortable writing a book about dating and relationships without talking about the fact that sometimes they end and heartache is fucking awful, and dealing with that with mental health issues, with sobriety, sober curiosity. It's hard. It's really hard. And there's a chapter about how to fight, the importance of healthy arguments.
Yeah. Well, you talk a lot about emotional sobriety in your book, which I think is brilliant. When I work with folks who are in early recovery, this is one of the things that I think really gets them through, is thinking about not only if they are chemically or behaviorally aligned with their sobriety plan, but what does emotional sobriety even mean to them? And what does it mean to think about integrating more balance and more evenness? So can you break down what your definition is of emotional sobriety?
Yeah, I mean, I think of emotional sobriety almost as like sex and love addiction, only you'll stick with me, stick with me here. Only because you have to define it for yourself. And I know that's an annoying answer. But so for me, for emotional sobriety, and I'm in recovery from sex and love addiction, I had to create what is my own rock bottom? What is a bottom line there? Like, what's a dangerous behavior? Because it's not like with alcohol or drugs or gambling, you just don't do it. You have to actually, you're still going to have relationships.
Yeah.
So you have to find it. Would be like me having to find a healthy relationship with alcohol. It's hard. It's really hard. Eating disorders, same thing. So anyway, for me, for my emotional sobriety, it's knowing that like which emotions do I feel and which make me feel out of control.
Yeah.
Rage is a big one. I like to punch walls. I like to break shit. And you can't really do that. But I found rage rooms, which yeah. I love a rage room. So for me, I know that if my rage is taking over, I need to pull back because my emotional sobriety is not in check.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I have this metaphorical toolbox that I take with me everywhere. Like, close my eyes, I do breath work, I call my therapist, call a friend, like journal. Like there's, just sometimes closing your eyes and counting to 10 can do wonders.
Yeah. And
it's the last thing I want to do when I feel like punching a wall.
Right.
But after the end of those 10 breaths, I always feel better. So like I said, for me, it's usually rage and anxiety. So if you're listening and you're like, well, what would my emotional sobriety be? It's going to be different for every single person. And you have to figure out which emotions completely consume you and how can you mitigate that?
Yeah.
How can you take care of that? How, on a preventative level and in a break glass in case of emergency level?
Yeah, I really think about it as like a commitment to emotional regulation.
Yes.
And keeping yourself in your window of tolerance, right? We all get big feelings, and sometimes those big feelings can just take us out, because if we are too behaviorally expressive with those big emotions, it can be really destructive to ourselves or to other people, or to walls in your case. But it's really about like recognizing like, oh, my emotions are getting big right now. So what do I need to do to bring myself back into a space where I am more regulated and back in the driver's seat, so the emotions aren't driving you around?
That's so real. I mean, there are times when it feels like my anxiety is driving.
Yeah.
And I would love to just at least put it in the passenger seat. Goals would be the trunk or just out of the car altogether, but just trying to keep it in the passenger seat for now. But it's difficult, but the more you work on it, the more self-aware you become. You feel the signs sooner. Now I see the foreshadowing of like when I'm about to have a rage attack. I can feel my heart races, my hands clench because I'm looking for something to punch. And I feel flushed. I feel hot. I don't feel right. I don't feel good.
Yeah.
And so the more you practice it, the more you get to know yourself, regulate your emotions, it does get easier, which is why, I cannot recommend finding a mental health support, whether it's peer support, therapy, listen to mental health podcasts, whatever you can.
Yeah.
Like it's because like I said, giving up alcohol is really such a small part of this journey. It's figuring out why you're using it.
Totally. I mean, we could argue that actually probably like the main component of recovery is emotional sobriety, because when you're emotionally sober, it's a lot easier to keep some of the substances or the compulsive behaviors at bay. So focusing on that is the gift. Like it's the hard work, but it's also the gift.
And it's, for me, I don't know if it's just because I'm a writer, but like I love learning words and definitions. So when I learned that there's a word to describe what I'm feeling, I don't feel alone. I know that there are things I can Google. There are activities I can do to feel better. So the more that I learn about myself and how my emotions and my brain works, I think just the happier I am. And I think I'm a better partner, a better daughter, a better friend. It's because I'm here. I'm fully here.
Yeah. What do you like least about being fully present with yourself?
Well, when that anxiety is like going 110, I fucking hate it. I really hate it. There are moments where I'm just like, God, if I could just take a shot right now, this would at least like, calm me down, which is like, again, you have to have these tools because life is still going to happen. You're still going to have really big fun moments to celebrate, and you're going to have moments of loss and grief and devastation and disappointment. And it comes back to the emotional regulation of, it's like, it sucks to be present all the time. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. Well, what do you like most about it in contrast?
I like that. Like I said, I feel like I'm a better person.
Yeah.
I'm fully present with you right now. My mind isn't thinking about anything else. I'm able to truly be here with you. I'm able to listen. My writing has never been better.
That is so true.
There's the whole Hemingway adage of write drunk, edit sober. I got to say, I would not have a book if I was still drinking. So if maybe that worked for him, I don't think it did.
No.
It didn't end too well for him. But I just feel like a more embodied human.
Yeah. And
before, I just look at that. I quit drinking when I was 29, but I look at her, I was like, God, she was sick. She was really struggling. She didn't know who she was. So she was just trying to be everyone else.
Yeah.
Trying to please everyone else.
Yeah.
And the fact that I don't feel like that anymore is probably my favorite thing about this journey.
That's amazing. You sound like the way you describe her.
Yeah.
29-year-old. She sounds lost.
Yes.
Like she hadn't really plugged into herself yet.
Very much. I mean, it's from age 14 to 29. I was self-medicating on a very regular basis. And I had no idea what I was hiding from. I have a gist, and I'm still learning, still unpacking some stuff, but I just feel more in control. I think maybe that's it. And I'm a control freak, so so I want to be in control.
So what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about recalibrating their relationship with alcohol, but they don't really know where to start or how to talk about it with the people around them who know them to be one way with alcohol?
Great question. I want to remind people you do not have to hit rock bottom before you decide to make a change in life. Like, don't hit rock bottom before you start therapy. Don't hit rock bottom before you reevaluate your relationship with alcohol. You can do a dry month. You can, there's so many resources out there, so many free resources too. Like, listen to podcasts, read articles, blogs, get my books available in most libraries, get as many resources as you can. Because like I said, just remembering that you're not alone is huge. If you can, even now, post-pandemic, virtual peer support groups are everywhere.
Yeah.
You can hop onto any peer support group virtually, go for a walk, camera off, just listen, just listen. And you don't have to hit rock bottom. I could see where my trajectory was going, and I stopped the train. I'm very grateful for that. And you can just tell someone that you trust, like, hey, I'm going through something. I want to drink less right now. I don't know what it means, but I wanted to share that with someone. And hopefully they'll ask how they can support you, and you'll tell them. Maybe you want them to invite you to restaurants that don't serve alcohol. Maybe that's your hangouts for the next couple weeks. Maybe they come over and you guys have a pot of tea. You figure out what you need. And the people who love you will absolutely love you and want to support you. And unfortunately, you're going to find out some people that are just your drinking buddies, and it's going to be devastating.
Yeah.
But you do have which is again why it's so important to find these peer support groups, or mental health support if you can.
We just touched on something that I think is super important. There's a tremendous amount of grief that can come with getting sober, especially when people realize that their relationships with some folks have to change. It's really hard. And how do you recommend people move through that space as they're deciding to take a little bit of distance from some of the people who they can only be friends with if they stay in that drinking or using space?
Grief is the perfect word, because you're grieving your old life.
Yeah.
You're grieving your old behaviors. You're grieving some relationships. You're grieving, like, I literally wrote a breakup letter to Jack Daniels.
Oh.
Like, I treated it like a breakup.
Yeah.
And earlier I said, deciding you want to drink less or not drink at all is one of the most confident things you can do. So whatever you can do to remember that's gonna get you going. Like, that's gonna keep you taking it one day at a time. Like, don't even worry about sober dating. Don't even worry about other relationships right now. Focus on yourself and your friendships. And anyone who gives you shit for doing a dry month or not drinking anymore, they're projecting their own shit onto you.
Yep.
And it's not about you.
Yeah.
At all. And it's going to hurt. It will hurt. I dealt with that. It was really difficult. But because I had peer support and a therapist and supportive friends, it didn't hurt as much. Yeah.
It does hurt, though.
It hurts.
And I think another way to think about it, and this can be really hard for a lot of folks, is it's important to start building new community. Right? And you can do that through peer support. You can do that through 12-step groups. You can go do other meetup groups that are not organized around alcohol or events like that. It is really, really essential to start building other community so that when you take away the coping skill of drinking or using or compulsively behaving in some way, you have some other folks and other things to do. You've got other people around you in your support. What are the words? The bleachers.
They're in your corner. Yeah. And in the first chapter of my book where I talk about dating myself, that's what I was doing, was building the community in those first few months. I was taking writing classes, studying Spanish. Just for me, I found that when I got sober, I had a lot of extra time and a lot of extra money because I was not getting shit-faced and I was not hungover anymore. So I took a lot of classes and went to other meetup groups. Like, I signed up for that half marathon for something else to do, and I did it with a friend. So that friend wasn't sober, but we had this alcohol-free activity to talk about and train for together. So I'm not saying go run a marathon. I'm saying just get into hobbies.
Yeah.
Fill your time with hobbies, and you're going to meet people organically because you have a shared hobby. Volunteering is also a great option. You're going to find other people who have the same passion as you.
That's a great idea. So any last advice or thoughts for folks on dating sober?
In the booze-free date ideas chapter, it's split up in like if you're just newly dating, if you've been with someone for a little bit, and then if you're like in a long-term relationship. Because I wanted to meet readers wherever they were. But the thread through all of them is that they're experiential dates. So if you are just getting coffee and staring at each other, it's very similar to sitting at a bar and just having drinks, you know? Nothing wrong with that. But I would encourage you to do something experiential, do something that's an activity, go to a museum, go to the botanical garden, go bowling, you know, just do something. You're going to get some of those anxious jitters out. That's going to be really helpful. But B, you're doing something external. Like you're looking at a painting. That's going to give you a lot to talk about instead of just like, where did you come? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? You know, and it gets you present. It gets you present in the moment with this other person. And that can start some really interesting conversations. And it's not going to matter if there's alcohol there or not, because you're having fun, you're engaging in something cultural and interesting.
Yeah. I love that idea. It also gives you a sense of like, does this person do adventure the same way I do, or in a way that's complementary to me? Yeah. And how do I do adventure, which is kind of a fun thing to discover if you're new to hobbies or just getting out in the world separate from drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. And in my book, I one of my friends, Rebecca, and her now husband, their first date was they're both photographers. And so they just went around New York City and just took pictures. And then it was like a 4-hour date of taking pictures together. Wow. And then they had a beer, you know? So it's like, just do something. Like they found that they both had photography in common. And it wasn't like their connection was not centered around alcohol at all. Those first few hours together were so rich and fulfilling to their own interests.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this and talking about your new book. Where can folks meet up with you if they want to work with you or read more about what you do?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on all of the social medias, Tawny Lara. And I have a newsletter called Beyond Liquid Courage where people send me questions about this topic, where I help people with interpersonal relationships without alcohol. And I co-host Recovery Rocks podcast where we talk about recovery and rock and roll.
That's amazing. Oh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is great. Well, thanks everyone for listening this week. I'll see you back next week. Thank you for listening to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Stay connected with me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Everyone has questions, and I want to answer as many as I can. So feel free to email your questions to question@getnakedpodcast.com. If you're looking for a free 30-minute consultation with me or someone on my team, visit modernintimacy.com. And don't forget to join our newsletter, Modern Intimacy, on Substack. Let's meet back here next week. A new episode drops every Tuesday. Disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy and does not constitute a professional relationship with Dr. Kate Balestrieri or Modern Intimacy. This podcast is strictly for education and entertainment purposes only.